Wood. 5 o'clock.
And I'd like to call this meeting of the Woodstock Village Board of Trustees to order. First item on our agenda is additions and deletions from to the agenda. Are there any additions or deletions?
No.
Trustees?
No.
Okay. Okay, then quick for people who haven't been here, although the 2 people here have been here plenty of times. The agenda is available online. There's a QR code over there if you want to log on.
There's some right there.
Yeah, there's actually, did you guys get all, Terry, did you get one? Okay, there are actually 3 here, so if you all would like them. Okay.
It's not that.
No, it's not. So with that's there,
Citizens comments.
yeah, we are not going to be voting on anything tonight. Just want to say that at first. The next item on the agenda is citizen comments. So once we have these citizen comments, there won't be any more later. So if you want to speak up in the room or on Zoom, citizens comments are going to happen now. We're going to give, because we only have this room until 6:15, we're going to give about 10 minutes total. And so we'll start with 1 minute for each person. If there's time after that, then we can add more. So are there any citizen comments in the room or online?
Is there any citizen comments for the short-term rental later on?
Nope, this is the only opportunity. So, okay, come on up. Is there a microphone up there?
There it is.
Okay. So we're going to give you a minute, and if there's time later, after everybody else.
I will be quick.
Okay, got it.
I wrote it down. I'm going to read it. I don't like doing that, but I figured it's going to save me 10 minutes of trying to find my words.
That's okay.
Okay.
And go ahead and give us your name and tell us where you're from.
Okay. My name's Derek DeMoss. I am a Woodstock resident. I am a short-term rental owner and a long-term rental owner. First off, I would like to thank the select board and the village trustees for spending the time to listen to the comments and concerns on both sides dealing with short-term rentals. It's really appreciated. I appreciate the time that you guys are putting into all this. From the conversation at the last joint meeting, I don't know if it's out of line, but I would also like to ask Brenda Blakeman to reconsider her statement, recusing herself from this conversation because she owns 2 short-term rentals. With absolute respect, I do not think her position is a conflict of interest any more or less than the amount of time or effort put into creating this ordinance by Frank Hornick and Laura Powell. As former members of the Planning Commission, sorry. I cannot stress that respect enough. I don't believe that there's any gain or hardship that would sway Brenda's opinion on this matter any more than any board member's individual opinion on short-term rentals. I appreciate the contributions from Laura Powell and Frank, as well as from the short-term rental owners such as Brenda Blakeman. This has been doing short-term rentals longer than most of us, and I think all of their opinions are of value to be heard. Again, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Roger? Tell us who you are for the people at home.
Oh, okay. I'm Roger Logan, Woodstock Village, et cetera, et cetera. I'd like to echo thanking everybody for the effort that's gone into this. I know it was a huge effort, and for all of the public comments, the constructive public comments that were made about this. I'd like to urge passage of this. I know you're not voting on it tonight, but I'm urging both boards to pass it. I do have some concerns with this, and I think my biggest concern is the fact that we are not advantaging Woodstock and on-site hosts to get permits. It's my belief, which I can't demonstrate necessarily, but that there has been implicit legal threat that if we do advantage Woodstock residents and on-site hosts, that the town faces costly legal efforts from the short-term rental corporate industry. And I think that's a pity. I think Woodstock residents, especially on-site hosts who want to earn or need to earn some additional money, I think that makes perfect sense. And it keeps the revenue in the town and it keeps the operations in the town. And I think that's a great benefit to Woodstock and a great benefit to those people who are responsibly renting short-term rentals. I think we've seen a lot of what I would consider AstroTurf lobbying by short-term rental lobbying organizations who have used scare tactics and who have worked, I think, to disadvantage the Woodstock residents who are interested in being short-term renters. Again, I urge the boards to pass this. I understand why it's necessary to be very risk averse about costly legal proceedings. But I again would urge you to seek ways in the future that are possible and that don't expose the town and the village to adverse risk, to find a way that we can advantage those people who live and reside in Woodstock, and especially those who are on-site hosts.
I'm gonna,
Thanks. I'm done.
Joe Davies online.
Jill, if you have a comment and tell us who you are.
Yes, Jill Davis, I live in the village. I've been listening to all of these discussions for many months, and I also would urge you to pass this legislation. I think the whole point is that there are a huge number of unknowns, and you're never going to reach perfection. So doing something that's 95% good is probably a whole lot better than waiting another 6 months and trying to look for the perfect solution. But doing something now and then being prepared to change it if something goes wrong. So if the owners, the homesteaders can't get the number of permits that they need, then we might learn that. But we don't know that, and we're not going to know that any better in a couple of months. So I think my comment was just take courage and make a decision with unknowns.
Thank you. Are there any other comments online? Okay, Derek, we've got a couple of minutes.
To make a comment?
Yeah, we'll give you another,
Again, real quick.
and there's no one else online? Just,
No, if anyone wants to make a comment afterwards.
okay, can she make a comment during, or,
No.
go ahead, yeah, I'm gonna give you another minute.
Okay, great, thank you. Again, Derek DeMoss, Woodstock resident. I would just like to say that, I mean, yes, there are a lot of unknowns to this. I think there's a lot of unknowns as to how many people are short-term renting, who's owner occupied, who's non-owner occupied. I am concerned about the fees. A lot of the short-term rental owners are concerned about the fees, how high they are. I am concerned about the differentiating between owner occupied and non-owner occupied. I think that's going to close out a lot of people from having the opportunity to switch if they decide to move here. A lot of people use second homes as stepping stones to become a resident up here, and that's potentially going to shut them out if they cannot change their owner occupied versus non-owner occupied. It's also going to shut out people who in the future may need to rely on short-term rental income if those caps are as restrictive as they are proposed right now. I just wanted to say that, I mean, I think that there's a lot more work that needs to be done to get an ordinance in the position that would be comfortable for all those, both the opponents, for the rental owners and people future that may look to rent short term.
Thank you. Do you have a citizen comment? We're just about to wrap up. Okay, just want to make sure we get everybody, and there's no one else online? Okay, Brenda, are you speaking as a trustee or as a citizen?
I guess I need to speak as a citizen
Okay,
since I recused myself last week,
okay, do you want to?
and I will do that.
Yes. And for those of you who haven't seen this happen before, I've done this previously when I spoke. When I had a conflict of interest, I've gone around. So this is not a new thing for those of you who haven't been to previous meetings.
Okay, my name is Brenda Bleakman. I live in the village. I do have 2 short-term rentals in Woodstock. I do believe I was probably the first person in Woodstock to get a conditional use permit. I have done everything in my power to always comply with the rules and regulations. After our meeting last week, I did some investigating because unfortunately, I don't know everybody. I don't really know Laura at all, and I don't really know Frank at all. And after I did some investigating, I found out that both of you were on the planning and zoning. And So in my eyes, what that means is that you guys help to write the rules. Now you're on the select board and you're on the trustees, which means now you can vote on the rules. I feel that's a huge conflict of interest, equally as much as my conflict of interest. So I think that we need to have a discussion going forward with that. I do think that we need to reconsider some of the rules and regulations. I think that it shouldn't be a 50-50 split, 50% non-locals and 50% locals. I think it should be a 60-40 split or something similar to that. Because there are lots of people within our community that contribute to our community every day. And they're the ones that are trying to pay their taxes. The second homeowners, in my eyes, obviously have enough money to buy a second home. Therefore, they really don't need the cash flow as much as someone else might that lives within our community trying to pay their taxes. So on that note, I would like to take back my recusal and I would like to sit on the board. That's it.
Thank you.
Explain to everybody what the statute is.
Was the planning commission or the?
Planning commission. Please.
Oh, yeah. Pass that over.
Sorry. Oh, actually, I have one more thing to say.
Yeah.
Roger, what got you to Woodstock?
A car.
No, no, a short-term rental at First Impressions.
Okay, now,
Yeah.
I am happy to say I stayed at Brenda's place. It certainly wasn't the first time I was in Woodstock. And it was a lovely place to stay. And again, I reiterate my support for giving people who are residents in Woodstock and especially people who are on-site hosts, which I think we could grandfather you in on that because you actually work there.
I know.
And I think those are the kinds of short-term rentals we should be encouraging.
thank you.
And that's like.
Eric. I think we've hit 12 minutes actually with public comment, so we're gonna end public comment, but Eric, you wanna?
Yeah, I just wanna, I've said this before publicly and I'll say it again. The planning commission is one of the many boards that fall underneath the purview of the select board and the trustees. Their role is to research, investigate, and suggest certain policies or ordinances to the boards for the board's consideration. That is their goal. The point of them existing is to help as a legislative body would help in committees, the Senate, Congress, everywhere else. So there is no issue with us on the planning commission also being involved in this because that's one of their roles is to advise the select board. We actually have ex officios on the planning commission for that purpose, to be involved in those conversations and to help the conversation and to create some statutes. So I just want to make that clear as we go forward that that's their role. And also the conflict of interest policy that we follow mentions a personal financial gain beyond the planning commission. Unless they own a short-term rental, they would not have any personal financial gain, in my view.
Thanks.
Time to go into executive session.
Yes. You want the thing?
I'll make a motion to go into executive session.
Do you want mine? It's downloaded.
1 VSA 313, to discuss the appointments to the planning board, right?
Planning commission.
Planning commission.
Can I just ask a procedural question? Are you talking about the short-term rental after this executive?
Yeah.
session?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you had the agenda, you would know that, Roger.
Well, it wasn't on the agenda. I didn't know if you maybe moved.
Is
So
there a
I'm
motion?
leaving.
Okay.
I'll make
the motion. Second.
All those
For
in
just a
favor?
second.
Aye.
Okay, then I would like to make a motion for the village trustees to go into executive session to discuss the appointment of members to the planning commission under 1 VSA section 313. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Did you vote? Oh, all opposed? Did you vote? Yes. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Okay, motion carries, so we're gonna go into executive session. Can we all fit back there?
No, I have
Oh,
the
we're
other
good for
room
that. Okay.
set up.
Thank you. So now we are out, so we're going to vote. I would,
I'll vote on the, yeah.
yeah. You're trying to jump, right? I would make a motion to appoint Alex Mully to the Planning Commission. Is there a second? Frank seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
I'll make a motion to appoint Alex Mully to the Planning Commission.
Do a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Hey, do you want to take the next one, Ryan?
Yes.
Thanks. The next item on our agenda is the short-term rental discussion. So as we said earlier, we've gotten our citizen comments. Thank you to everyone. And so now we're going to move into discussing what we have heard and sent emails from, seen articles on, all the input that we've gotten from the Planning Commission, and discuss what we think of it. Do you want to start us off?
Yeah,
Eric?
two things. Can I have the microphone a little bit closer? Nikki, can we share my screen? So just two things. One is meeting is kind of set up for both boards to discuss this publicly together. So we're asking the public to not interrupt with questions or comments. To allow the boards really the first time to discuss this and the feelings on the ordinance publicly. There will be a second meeting we have tentatively scheduled for next Wednesday, depending on where the boards are at. That could be another discussion or a vote on the ordinance. So there will be more time for public comment and questions between now and before any vote happens. And if I'm allowed. All right, so it's kind of to guide the boards going through. I thought we'd start with A. There's an ordinance in front of you. What do the boards think of the fact that a short-term rental ordinance, needs to happen or wants to happen?
If I could just frame it a little.
Yeah.
Eric. Because I think there's been some confusion about the process. Like Eric said, the planning commission is advisory, so I would really love for us not to think of this as a passing or opposing this ordinance, but whether if we feel like it's adequate passing it, or if we want to make changes, it is our job as the boards to make changes to it. So by no means do we feel like this ordinance could be at its final stages unless that's the wishes of the board. Just how I want to frame it.
Any comments from anybody about the ordinance?
Trustees, do you all see a need for an ordinance?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, Eric, there you go.
Next, the
That's easy.
current ordinance has a cap on the amount of permits that are allowed in this ordinance. It's currently recommended at 55, for a total of 110, which is a split 55 for owner occupied and 55 for non-owner occupied. That's what the planning commission has recommended. But the board obviously rediscuss what they think should be the cap, or if it should be a cap, or I don't know, if Laurie, if you want to start ex officio to the planning commission on where the 55 came from.
Yeah, I mean, as you guys have seen, and as Ben and Stephen have talked about in previous meetings, and are in the 110 from about 5%, is reflective of about 5% of our current housing stock, and is what the planning commission feels is appropriate for our community. There are other communities that have different percentages. Burlington, with their new ordinance, it reflects about 2% of their housing stock that are allowed. Places like Stowe have more than 1,000 short-term rentals. That reflects closer to 20 to 25% of their housing stock. Planning Commission has done research. There is a community in Maine that saw a difference in terms of rent and housing inventory availability around the 9% mark. So that's where the 110 comes from in terms of the 55 and the 55. As we stated, right now, we believe that about 2/3 of our short-term rentals are non-owner occupied, and about 1/3 of them are owner occupied. So, even with the equal treatment of these under the permits, we're allowing for some growth for owner occupied. But again, welcome to feedback on those caps.
Could those caps be changed? If we,
Yeah, so as Laura pointed out, this is just a recommendation from the planning
This is
commission.
just the
The
recommendation.
boards can decide on anything they want to do when it comes to
like, if
caps.
you tried it for a year and decided you wanted to change it one direction or the other?
Yeah, I think the planning commission has had a plan to audit this process and publish a report after a year of this programming, which would reflect the numbers and compliance, and if it's something we felt needed to be changed, and also if there's new developments in case law, then maybe that's something the boards have an appetite for.
So we would change the ordinance so that the boards would have the power to determine.
Yeah, we'd run it by legal counsel, but there is a scenario where the ordinance states that the cap will be set by the boards. And it'll be a separate part of the ordinance that could then be changed at the board's wishes without reopening the whole ordinance.
Trustees, do you have comments about the caps question? Well, it's not really questions, but we're here to have a discussion.
Yeah.
About what you think and feel about.
I think having been on the planning commission and gone through this work for a while, the research that we came up with, it showed that, putting that 5% cap will kind of keep with and maintain the beautification of Woodstock. Anything more could start to offset that. And I think the 55 is where we should be and not change that, so there isn't any issue. We favor one or the other.
I guess I would like to have clarification on what is classified as non-owner occupied or owner occupied. What is your classification for that? Someone that lives on
Separate.
premise?
It's, if you can produce a homestead declaration, you're considered owner occupied. If you can't produce a homestead declaration, you're non-owner occupied.
Okay, like as an example, my salon has an apartment that I do.
Right, it would be non-owner occupied.
Okay, and that's how it is right now, but honestly, I spend more time at the salon than I do at home.
Yep.
That's why you go to Miami.
Exactly.
I have a question. Do you have any idea how many non-registered short-term rentals are out there in Woodstock?
Ben answered this last night. It changes depending on seasonality. But we have, I think, more than we'd care to admit that are non-permitted. Again, it depends on where you're searching and what seasonality. We can't expect to find them all. It depends when you're searching on platforms. I would guess it's anywhere from, I have confidence we could find at least 50 for sure that are not permitted,
So plus the ones that are permitted.
plus the ones that.
Yeah, we've got 70 of those that are, and let's go ahead and say it. There are 70 legal short-term rentals in Woodstock right now.
And how many are owner occupied and how many are, I saw it in the notes, but I just. don't
It's
know.
1/3, so 1/3 are owner occupied and 2/3 are non-owner occupied.
And I'm assuming that the ones that aren't registered are non-owner occupied?
So that portion came up last night. It's very hard to tell because without going to the house and finding out, but
Thank you.
I think the assumption is they're probably non-owner occupied, but we can't say that definitively.
Okay, thank you.
So what's gonna happen if someone has been running an Airbnb, we'll call it, without being registered at all? They've been flying under the radar. And now they've decided that, okay, I was getting a little nervous. People are gonna start checking up on me. And they decide that they want to now apply for a permit. How's that gonna go?
Do you mean?
Do you want to take a? stab
Yeah.
at it?
Yeah, I think I know the answer.
Okay.
At least you can test me.
Okay.
So my understanding is, what is recommended from the planning commission is that when in August, this is the way it's set up right now, but whenever that is, when the new ordinance goes into effect, that people who are existing owner occupied and existing non-owner occupied are first in line.
Mhm.
So those people, and those are people that had it before September. So before this conversation started,
Before the moratorium.
before the town moratorium,
Mhm.
those people are first in line. So the people that were already following the laws,
Mhm.
they're first in line. After that, whatever is left, anybody can go for those spots. So if right now we've got 70 that are legally operating STRs, that means that there's what, 30, 40, 50, 40, 40 opportunities for other people to have those spots. So if somebody is not in compliance right now, there's an opportunity for them to be in compliance.
Okay, in
As
August.
long as they haven't reached the cap.
As long as they haven't. reached-
Yeah.
Correct.
In other words, if there's 50
Oh,
owner occupied and 20 people apply, only 5 get a permit. So now we're back into the legal part of doing it. If we have, if,
But they have the same opportunity that everybody else who does
Right.
not have a.
Right.
Yeah. So everybody that's doing it right now jumps at the head of the line because
Alright,
they've been
so-
following the rules.
so basically what you're saying is we don't know how many of those 70 people are non-owner and are
No,
owner.
We do. So 1/3 of them are owner occupied and
Okay.
2/3 of the 70, I don't know what that math is. So whatever 1/3 of 70 is are owner
Okay.
occupied. So less than 55.
Okay.
So we know that there are going to be enough for people who currently are registered and then more people who are not registered, whether they are operating or not. So that can be new people that move to town. That can be people who just decide today to do it.
Okay.
Did I get that right?
Yep.
Guys, okay.
Good job.
I'm taking notes. Trustees, any other about the caps, suggestions, questions, ideas? This is our time to publicly talk about things. Lisa, we're gonna put for Lisa's first meeting. She's like, what is happening?
I guess the only thing I don't know how to word this. All this, and I'm probably getting ahead of myself, but all this flows down to how do we manage this?
Mhm.
And doesn't each one of these, aren't they each all dependent on another? So I don't know if, I understand the cap on the STRs, but when you have other I'm just saying I understand it. I'm not
Okay.
sure about it because there's other issues that kind of tie to the cap.
Okay, such as, get your thoughts, Lisa.
I know my
That's this
thoughts,
job.
like the management of it, of the STRs and the position of the person who is the enforcement officer and, the amount of expense that goes with the enforcement officer. And so does this cap meet that money?
Oh, you mean the fees?
The fees, well, does
Okay.
the fees to the personnel and other things, and if we only have 20 owner occupieds, and we have this budget, what are we gonna do if we don't get that other 35 that's expected? I think you know what I'm saying.
Okay.
You're saying.
And-
I think that there's several parts to how this is being presented by the planning commission in terms of how the program is administered. Half of this is software. The other half is staffing. That staffing and the time that is budgeted is largely dependent on how many permits there are, kind of like in zoning right now. We pay 2 full-time people. But a lot of the work that they do is dependent on how many permits they receive. And so if there is less permits, then there will be like less staffing need. And yeah, how do we cover that? That is a risk. But it's something that could be mitigated by, I don't know, making that person part-time or hourly, depending on the need we have the first year. I think the planning commission has said it's very important. I personally think it's very important that the cost of this falls on the operators of the short-term rentals and not the general taxpayers as it is now, because it's not being enforced. But but that is also up to the commission and what we feel like the value to the community is and whether or not we want to subsidize short-term rentals for the benefit of our community or not.
And just to add two things to that, one, we're talking about like reasonable expenses and fees. It doesn't have to be down to the dollar. There's wiggle room, so you can say if, you know, your $20,000 to $30,000 can be raised to make sure you have a buffer for anything that it's unprepared. They don't expect you to be right exact.
Okay.
They understand that this is not exact science. But the other point, I think is taken well, where if the cap was 2020, right, then probably the fees are be much higher to offset. So they all work in conjunction, and that's why I think we'll go through these one by one, kind of have the conversation. Then we'll have to kind of make sure we're all on the same page of how does the cap and the fees work together.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I have a question. So let's say the ordinance passes at 55-55. And,
Or that's our suggestion. Ordinance passes and then we,
right, but non-owner occupied is only 30. Can the boards change that to increase the permits and for owner occupied
Like after the fact,
after the fact?
Oh, like distribute the balance
Yeah.
to owner occupied?
yeah, I mean,
I think,
potentially, but I think we want to run that by other people to make sure it was honorable. But I think we're getting a little too far ahead of ourselves. You know, we talk about what could happen. I think we have to kind of come up with an ordinance that is as strong as possible for what we know right now. We can't predict what's going to happen, you know, after this goes into effect, if it does.
Okay, so the expenses going forward for this particular program, the program itself
Mhm.
is gonna be 30,000?
the software's roughly 30,000. It's in the,
I think,
document.
Yeah.
I think it's in here.
All right, so the program itself is 30,000. Then we're gonna
There
have
you go.
to pay,
It's a total of 145.
okay,
That's the breakdown.
all right, advertising and mailing, what is that for?
So that advertising and mailing, that's, so we are legally obligated to post some things in newspapers. And so that covers those costs. And then mailings is like literally mailing people their certificates, mailing,
The permits.
yeah, like the amount of money that gets spent on, you know, that's one of the things that we spend a lot of money in our budget on, is because so many things are required legally to be mailed out. If you've ever done an ad in the Standard,
Mhm.
you know, it's a couple $100.
All right, and so we're gonna have that is staffing.
So that's the staff that we currently have, that's correct, right?
This is budgeted for 1,200 hours. There's no differentiation right now between this work falling on Stephen and Stephanie or hiring like a third person. The cost would come out to roughly be the same.
So we're gonna have to hire someone to sit in planning and zoning and sort of handle this.
Well, for right now, it sounds like this is part of the salaries currently of Stephanie and Stephen.
It's
Because-
what their time allocated to this
Yeah.
would cost, instead of what their time is currently allocated. And I'll just say, again, this is the planning commission's recommendation for what they feel is a reasonable expense to run the program.
And do you want to finish off with caps before, I want to make sure that we're talking about everything. Does anybody else have any other comments about caps? Because I know we wanted to do caps and then.
Then
fees.
other concerns, topics, questions, and then get to fees.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't we just hire somebody to monitor, to get on the web and look at Airbnb and
that's what-
HomeAway?
Yeah, so that's what the software is. So the software
Right,
literally
but
does
why
it.
wouldn't we take the people that we're paying $66,000 for and ask them to get on the web and browse and see who's got short-term rentals?
Because a
That
lot of people,
software is gonna be scrubbing 82 different sites and any other sites that we program it to scrub
you literally can't do it that cheaply
every
with a person.
second. And you cannot put any human over a computer to do that every second.
Are there any other comments about caps? Board have- My only comment about the caps is what I what I like about the caps is, and I've said this before, my primary concern is the people who live here. And the fact that we have currently less owner occupied than the 55 means that there is room for people who live here to have SDRs. And if they need them to pay their bills, supplemental income, whatever, that is my priority. So in the 55-55 split, no matter what it is, I always want to make sure that we've got, I want people to have that opportunity, the people who live here to have that opportunity. That is always going to be my priority. So the fact that there is, how many owner occupied right now? 30?
21, 22.
That means that 20 or 25, how many ever residents can decide today, oh, I need this, or I want this, whatever it is. And again, that is, the people who live here are the priority for me. Anyone else?
Well, so.
Next is, other concerns, topics, questions the board wants to discuss outside of fees, ordinance that's currently presented.
I'll say just something that's come up in conversations, and I know I've had a lot of conversations and maybe other board members have too. But the ordinance right now lists the number of times you are able to rent within the village and other certain zoning districts to unlimited rentals. The planning commission found in their research that we were unable to enforce the kind of cap on number of times rented that had been in the previous regulation. And so in doing so, that kind of informed obviously the caps and other things, but I think it's an important consideration when we're thinking about the character of our neighborhoods, obviously, but also how much opportunity there is for people that do have permits that aren't currently renting out unlimited.
Very tricky.
It is very tricky.
And I know we're all keen to maintain the character of the village and the town that we all love so well, while, you know, allowing residents, and particularly residents who live here, the opportunity to extract value from their own properties. I think we're all would be keen to privilege residents of the town, but we have to balance that with the risk we expose ourselves to through having unequal enforcement between owner occupied versus non-owner occupied. So it's very tricky, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into it. And I was heartened to hear that, you know, we can potentially, or, you know, hypothetically, we could approve this ordinance and then have the leeway to revisit these caps and the fees, say, annually, if they seem to be not working.
Can you, can we look at this, not annually, but 6 months from now? Are we able to, or does it only have to be once a year?
I mean, you can look at it as much as you want. I think some of the consideration is you want to not make this confusing because exercise of people who are renting short-term rentals. So if you're changing the fees every 6 months, you're changing the caps every 6 months, people can get frustrated and give up. And so you want to make it kind of equitable for them and make it as streamlined as possible. So I think a good compromise might be having the planning commission come in front of the boards after 6 months and discuss the current status of it. And if they see any glaring mistakes or issues that could be fixed, might be a good way to kind of review it and then have the full audit at the end of the first year. But I mean, at any time, the planning commission works with the board, so they can always ask the planning commission to come and present at any point.
Any other questions, concerns, topics?
Yeah, please.
I had someone come to me today and tell me they own a big farm in South Woodstock. It's like 2 or 3 generations in the family now. They're doing all they can to maintain it, you know, to hay it, do maple syrup, blah, 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 so that they can afford to keep the family farm. And they have, I guess what used to be their mother's house that is an old rickety house somewhat. It's not very well insulated. They close it down for the winter and they only use it in the summertime. And they've rented it out to people from GMHA for years. The fees that we're suggesting are not, they wouldn't work well at all for this particular situation because they only do it like really like 6 months. So I think there's a group of people out there that we also need to take a look at that do that kind of thing. It's almost like having a campground, you know, like for the summer. I think that we need to consider that as another, they don't advertise through short-term rental. That's from word of mouth. They've done it for 25 years. They've done it for 25 years and they just said the money that they get helps them to pay their taxes each year. So I just think that we need to consider things like that, these things are going on in our community. And I think we need to maybe listen to these people and maybe there's some other way that we can handle that. I don't know.
Something we could do is a fee abatement. So if people make a certain amount of money or less, they could apply to have their fees abated. If you feel like they're not running it as a full-time commercial enterprise, that's certainly something that the boards could entertain. Again, I mean, I think that it's all a balance and there's certainly, like Carrie said, a need for us to keep how residents are extracting value from their properties in mind. I think it's the magnitude at which that scale happens that we're concerned about, and how much that is subsidized by the general taxpayer. And my personal view is that we can pass those fees on to guests very easily, especially if we're capping the number of permits there are. That limits the number of short-term rentals available. So it does, in theory, increase demand. But I think a fee abatement, if everyone felt like there was, I think something, yeah, we could do something like less than $10,000. Again, that adds to the cost of administration because it means that it's added time per permit. So we still need to make sure that those fees are getting covered. I don't know. How do you feel about that, Brenda?
I don't understand I don't understand why the fee would be so extensive on something that would be minimal. I'm not sure what you have to go through to approve these permits, but it just seems like, I mean, it would seem to me like it would take maybe a half an hour to look over a permit.
We have about 11 hours from planning and zoning budgeted for each permit, which is about what they.
11 hours?
Yep.
Why is that?
You would have to ask them, but that's what it takes to answer phone calls, have meetings with people who have questions about this. It also takes the amount of time that it needs to advertise, and do the communications, run the software, and then go over to make sure that the applications are actually right, and then also travel out to sites when there is like a complaint or a potential violation. I don't think that's uncommon for the permits that they have now through the planning and zoning office.
So are you saying that the planning commission is going to be policing?
No, not the planning commission.
Okay.
No, but I think to go back to your broader question in terms of like, maybe it's a better focus of our conversation to what the fees should be. So, because the original comment is that you feel like they're unreasonable. So scaling those down before we talk about a fee abatement, maybe.
Okay.
Another scenario that Stephen ran is bringing down the fees to $500 base fee for owner occupied and $1,000 base fee for non-owner occupied, with a $250 fee for 1 to 4 occupants, $1,000 for 5 to 8 occupants, $2,000 for 9+ occupants. That gets us roughly to the same number to run the program. That's estimating about 30 owner occupied and 55 non-owner occupied. That's different than the fees that are currently proposed by the planning commission, which are $750 for owner occupied and $3,000 for non-owner occupied.
And so that amount would cover the 145 that,
In theory, it would, again, it's
theory.
all theoretical depending on the number of rooms and the number of occupants people have that come forward who want to be permitted through this process.
And I think as we move into the fee conversation, I just want to remind the board that don't focus on, again, it's like 145. First of all, we have to decide if 145 is the right cost, but also, as Laura pointed, we're not gonna can guarantee that whatever the fee is, it's gonna get to a certain dollar. There's gonna be changes, abatements, people not doing it. So what you want to do is get to a reasonable fee that you feel is appropriate, that will reasonably cover the cost of the program. So I don't want people to fixate on trying to get right to 145. You know, use a broad brush to get somewhere in that ballpark if that's where you want to fall on.
I have a question. Let's say someone gets to an owner occupied and there's something wrong and they call the person they're supposed to call and they don't answer, they don't get back to them. Can those people, I know they complain to Airbnb, but do they also have the option to complain to the planning commission?
Not to the planning
not the-
commission. The planning commission has no enforcement.
No, well, I mean, whoever, I'm sorry, I don't know who's enforcement.
The enforcement officer,
That would probably fall more on a call to the police officer,
Yeah.
because that
Right.
could be a potential fraud if someone's not letting you into your building. So it wouldn't be regulating short-term rentals in that sense. It would be probably more of a fraud situation for
Right.
the
But
police.
that would eventually make it to the short-term rental officer as a potential problem.
We'd have to look at what, and Laura might know this better than I, what
what the violation
the
is.
violation is and what the permit says. So if someone was in violation of the permit, we'd have the power to.
So if Airbnb or one of these companies finds a violation, are they obligated to inform the village, the town?
Well, right now Airbnb or any of these platforms aren't aware of like what our current local ordinances are. They're really only informed about like what the state level regulations are. It's possible that that could be in the future in larger markets and then work its way down to something like Woodstock. But I mean, I think if it depends again on the nature of what the complaint is. If it's a safety complaint, obviously they should reach out to the fire department. If it's something else, like it would be weird, maybe for the visitor to know what the permit entails.
Right.
Right? So
Thank you.
it depends.
So having the fire department go out and inspect them, that's a separate fee? Or is that part of the?
That's a separate fee,
how
and that's
often-
always been a separate
Right,
fee.
all right, how often do we try that? Yearly or?
It changed, I would have to check. I believe it's every year that they have to renew their permit with the fire department. They also have to be inspected by the fire marshal, is that right? State fire marshal.
But that's how many times?
I think that's a
one
one
shot
shot deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm unaware of anything that you have to do with the fire department on a yearly basis.
Yeah.
What do you
most
have to
people
do?
are. You have to renew your permit with the fire department, short-term rental.
What permit?
It's David Green's, yeah.
Yeah, look, I can answer that. And Brenda, you've done them through me before. So it goes through me and then I give them to David. It is the yearly report. It's 200 for village, 75 for town.
Okay.
you're following.
Thank you,
I
Nick.
said I try to. You do. I just don't know I always do.
So back on fees conversation, so
Yes.
Laura spoke about potential different fee structure, but we have about, I'd say about 10 minutes left before we want to save some time to then discuss next steps.
The 11 hours for each permit?
Yeah.
That seems high to me.
I mean, that's something the planning and zoning can speak to. I know neither of them. We've had consistently 2 planning and zoning staff for I
Over a
don't know,
year.
Well, yeah, but even before that, when Neil and Michael were here, and we've never been able to effectively enforce these laws or this regulations. So, yeah, that's what they estimate. I think, I mean, I've sat in that office before. I think we'd all be surprised how much time is involved with people coming in and out. Maybe Eric can attest to it better, coming in and out and answering phone calls, but that is not just the time for, I think, for most permits, including the time that it takes for certain review boards to have to permit them and mail them and issue them.
So I just want to, I think, say two things. One, to Laura's point is, I can't tell you exactly how much time it takes planning and zoning to do a single permit. I can tell you trying to do anything like this takes a lot more time than you think it does. Until you're in the office trying to go through this process, you won't understand just the amount of time it takes for what seems like a simple process from the outside to actually get accomplished from beginning to end. So whether it's 11 or 10 or 15, I can't speak to it, but I do know these things take a lot of time. Second, I just want to kind of push back on the boards is I don't want us to get trapped in very small things. You know, if 11 hours it takes to do permits, there's not really magic to the ordinance, right? It's, we want to talk about what you think the fee should be, what charge to a short-term rental person on unoccupied, non-occupied. A separate conversation is what do we think the expenses will be to run the program, and that will dictate some of the fees. But I think we want to talk about planning commission's recommendation and where the board feels they're comfortable with, if they're happy with that recommendation, if they want to go higher, if they want to go lower. But I think that's where we should set the conversation around for a little bit to kind of get to some, hopefully some agreement of a number or close to a number.
So I think less is where I'm headed. My concern is covering the costs, and I know that that's variable. And there's there's sort of two components of that. One, this is a business, whether you're doing it because you need to cover your taxes or you want to send your kid to college, or you're doing it because this is a business that you choose to get into because you want to do it for whatever reason. It's a business and it needs to be regulated as a business. And as soon as we start charging less than what it costs, or our best guess of what it costs, taxpayers are subsidizing other people's businesses. And I know our business community would not ask for that, and they figure out how to balance their books and how to pay for things. So if we get this as low as we can while covering our costs, I think if the price of an STR per night has to go up and that is pushed onto the consumer, that's okay. I am first concerned about, again, the people who live here. The STR owners are included in that. I want to make sure that they can run what they need to run, but I'm also not willing to increase taxes on residents to pay for someone else's business. I think we all sort of make our choices, and this is an opportunity where with the fees, if you have to raise it $50 a night, raise it $50 a night, and that's what the consumer's gonna have to spend. I think Laura made a good point, and I had not thought about this with the cap. If there's only 110 options, then supply and demand says that you can raise the price. I appreciate that there continues to be a carve out in this process for people that are 14 days or less. I think that's really important because there are some people who, like, just for wassail, I'm from a hometown with a NASCAR track, and twice a year people rented out their houses or their parking. And that was important, and people would make a ton of money, 6 days a year. And that was really important. So I think that our folks should have the same opportunity, during wassail or, another big event. If it's less than 14 days, do it, man. Get as much cash as you can. But when you become a business and you're doing it year round, that's where we need to treat it as a business. So my preference is lower than what it is right now for the fees. And what that number is, I'm not sure if it's 500 and 750 or whatever it is. Yes, I want it to be less, but I want to make sure that the cost to manage STRs does not go to our taxpayers who are not STR owners.
So it does seem to me by removing the number of times per year that one can rent their STR, we're really I mean, then that's honestly the part that I'm most concerned about.
Yeah.
Even though we haven't been able to enforce it, it was always there, even if it's toothless, it was still
Yeah.
something that you could, if you saw your neighbor renting it out more often than 6 times per year, you could complain. It gave everybody a sense of comfort, I think. And I'm kind of worried about getting rid of that limit. And a high price seems to me a reasonable exchange.
Yeah.
Don't be shy, y'all.
First time I heard of Stevens.
Yeah, I asked him to run the scenario.
Those are the biggest complaints I've heard is the
Yeah.
price
Yeah.
of all this.
I mean, I think,
And hard to recoup possibly, especially if you can only rent so many times.
Well, they're getting rid of
But
that.
they're getting rid of that.
I mean, this
Right.
proposal proposes getting rid of that.
In
Getting
my
rid of that.
opinion, kind of helps out some of the rate, but,
I mean, to go from
to
6
what
to
cost?
unlimited,
Yeah, I get it.
that's,
I get it. But the
So,
price is the biggest thing I've had complaints about.
and I like the idea of, what you call it, a rebate or a
Abatement.
Abatement.
Yeah.
especially for fixed income. I've had a couple people come up to me, they rent their homes, sometimes more than 14 days in order to pay their property tax.
Mhm.
65, they live on a fixed income. Without doing that, they can't pay their taxes. So they have great concerns, and so they want to stay. And I don't want to say you have to leave. Hoping that that's a possibility to look at.
Absolutely. Again, I think it's all of these things in balance, and I really appreciate the conversation because I think we know the value that short-term rentals bring to our community. It's how we got Roger and Susie. For example, it's how we
Is
get.
that an argument against?
It's how we get a lot of families and primary homeowners. I think a lot of the concern that's merited is again, the magnitude of this issue. It's how many properties have been converted to short-term rentals, how many properties are being considered investment properties and being bought speculatively and forcing out or making it impossible for people in this community to stay here, while also empowering the people who are here to stay here. It's a balance. And that's why this is very tricky.
Okay, and we've got 12 minutes
No,
till the next
Yeah.
meeting, 6:30.
12 minutes to the next meeting.
So for now, just because I want to get to the next steps, unless anybody has something burning, they would like to, nobody's, Eric, can you take us through sort of what our next steps are in this process?
So I think we should recap kind of where we're at. So the original goal from the planning commission was to have this ordinance in effect by July 1, which would necessitate a vote by, I think, May 1st or May 2nd to get that 60 days done. We're sitting on April 17th, which gives us about 2 weeks before a vote would have to happen. That is the deadline they have. It makes things nice and easy for that's the fiscal year. Obviously, the board doesn't have to reach that timeline if we're not ready. But it would make things easier on their end and probably our end if we could hit that goal. We had originally had a tentative vote scheduled for next Wednesday at a joint meeting. I'm not sure if we're there yet or not. I think we do a recap of where we're at and go forward. But if we want to schedule another discussion on the 21st, with more details, we could try to schedule another meeting before May 1st or 2nd to get it done. Or the board can decide to take more time and,
We don't have a sample ordinance written up, do you?
we have the simple ordinance that the planning commission presented, and it's on their website as well.
Okay.
So with that said, I think if I could kind of give a recap to get a sense of where we're at, I think both boards agree that an ordinance is needed. I don't think there's any objection to that. were both boards okay with the 55-55 splits, or do you think we need more conversation with that?
I'm comfortable with it.
I think I'm okay with it as, at least as a starting point.
Yeah, yeah. I think as long as we can revisit it, I
Mhm.
think that's the important thing is like passing an order that says the boards can revisit this so that, because I do want to be nimble, like if another COVID happens again and all of a sudden things crash, like we might need to make decisions. If all of a sudden everybody says, go visit Woodstock, like maybe we need to make some changes. I want to be able to change as our market needs it.
Okay, and then there was some interest in having an abatement option for a certain dollar amount. There was also some concerns about the unlimited rental possibility, but people felt that fees kind of offset that risk, and so people seem okay with the unlimited rental for,
Can we also leave that open to something that we change
that's,
or no?
Can't have it both ways.
Okay,
I mean, I think we can, but I think that's also going to dictate the fees. You know,
Okay,
I think if
okay,
you talk about
that's
higher
right,
fees,
right,
you want to tell
okay.
people you're paying more, but you can rent more so they can offset the cost that way. Okay, so we're kind of all in a general ballpark there. When it comes to fees, the planning commission's original recommendation, 3,000 and, was it 750? With the extra revenue going towards, long-term housing initiatives. Is anyone still kind of on that area that they would like to be there? Or is everyone advocating for lower fees?
Lower fees.
Lower.
Yeah. I have to
Lower
look at-
fees.
I have to look at the numbers.
I'm strongly, if we're gonna have unlimited numbers of rentals through the year, then I think the fees are reasonable
The reason, as they currently
as
stand?
they currently.
I just.
I agree too, because if you take a look at it, if we keep the fee to $750 for owner occupied and it's $250 per occupant, you have 4 occupants, $750 for a year. If you rent it out for a third of the year, it's only $13 extra a day that you're passing on to that person who's gonna be renting to your house. And you're unlimited, so that will just get smaller and smaller and smaller, that fee. So you're just spreading it out. And it's not gonna be that, it's not that bad when you break it down. Yes, it looks bad as a whole. You break it down per rent or per occupant, it's very cheap.
That seems good going forward. That fee, when you break it down, looks really nice, but there's also people that can't afford to pay that money up front to get themselves in the proper place that they need to be able to rent their places out.
So is the question though, then we should be subsidizing that?
Say that again?
Like you're asking us to cover those costs then?
No, what I'm saying is the fees are too high. And if you've got people out there that are flying under the radar and they want to then do it the proper way, the reason they're flying under the radar is they can't afford to do it the right way in the first place. So I think that the fees are too high. Therefore, it's going to make it very difficult for them to pay the expense.
But the fees are low now and they're not doing it the correct way.
Yeah.
I understand that, but I'm just saying, I think there's a group of people out there that are in that place.
I think I hear that, but I mean, like, if it's a business, Brenda, like, how much did you have to pay to open your salon, to get all the licensing and license all of your hairdressers? Like, if someone was able to go to their town and say, like, pay for my license, or go to the state and say, pay for my license.
I understand exactly what you're saying, but do you do that with long-term rental?
Yeah, you have to put up your security deposit before you rent anything, so sometimes
But that's
2 months.
minimal compared to what we're talking about here. And long-term rentals, there's no rules, no regulations, there's no anything. And that's the problem with long-term rentals, is that there's too many people out there that have gotten burnt that rent long-term. And truthfully, short-term, at the end of the day, when you get done, you have a lot less headaches and the people are really nice.
Well, but long-term rentals, that's a state issue.
But why should that be any different than short-term rental? It's kind of all the same thing. If it's a business, it's
no.
a
I
business.
think it's very different.
Yeah.
And part of the town plan is we want to encourage more long-term rentals.
Long-term,
Well, that's, see, and that's the next problem
So now
is,
Well, then that's a state issue that I don't think can affect. And so I think we need to just look at short-term rentals.
Okay, so I just heard the excess money from the short-term rentals from that program is now going to go
It's not
into,
going into it.
into a program to help going forward with long-term rental.
The planning
projects.
commission's recommendation was if there's excess revenue, that excess revenue could go into a program to incentivize long-term housing. That's the planning commission's.
For example,
For
if someone who was non-owner occupied couldn't get a permit, but still wanted to rent their home, they could be incentivized for a sum to convert their short-term rental to a long-term rental if they were unable to get a permit through this process.
Yeah, and the EDC housing subcommittee has everything is already in place. So you don't even have to reinvent the wheel if that's where the money is.
Like, that was the planning commission's recommendation. If there is excess revenue, the boards could decide to have that revenue go.
But if we decide to drop the revenue to the point where it's only covering costs and there is no excess revenue.
Yeah.
Yep.
Correct. The point is just, yeah.
Just need to,
So,
adjourn.
yes. So,
So we'll schedule another meeting, for next Wednesday, another joint meeting. Let me just make sure. On the,
What time?
I just want to see what the schedule is Wednesday. So there's a meeting at 7:30, tomorrow, next Wednesday. So we do again, it's at 5 o'clock. Give the boards 2.5 hours to discuss.
trustees,
Yep.
next Friday or next
Wednesday.
Wednesday at 5 o'clock.
What's the
I'm
date
just
on
making
that?
it right. The
Wednesday.
24th.
24th, okay.
5 o'clock.
Yep.
And we can meet till how long?
To 7:30.
Okay. I mean, we don't have to meet till that long.
Well, for trustees, that's a short meeting. For the select board, it's a long meeting.
Hey.
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
I'm a little punchy tonight.
Select board's adjourned.
I'd like to make a motion for the trustees to adjourn. Is there a second?
I say,
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
is this going to
Awesome.
be announced like on the listserv and things
Thank you.
like that, that we're having this meeting?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes.
I just
Yes.
hadn't.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll send it to all of you.
Thank you.